I'm the county chair here in Washington County. Pleased to have this gathering. I know Republicans who don't believe that this many Democrats in 4 counties. Today I want to recognize a few individuals and people. Do we have any county chairs here that from other counties? Stand up, raise your hand. They can tell you, my wife would sure tell you, the county chair's job is time-consuming, sometimes thankless stuff. Anybody who's pulling the stuff up to do that work needs your approval and the recognition. Also, we have here Cecil Webster, who is in Senate District 18 of the State Democratic Executive Committee. I think Sally is here. Sally Kumar. She got really gerrymandered out of Senate District 18. So did an outstanding job. Josh Tutt, who is our candidate for Senate District 18. I want to thank the Democratic Club for providing the water. There's water over here. And some of you may need it. That's a pretty good walk in here. And I want to thank all the organizers, the vital crew that comes with Beto's road crew. They're on missions and travel in a lot of different places. It's a really good organization. And I just want to say one thing. In November, on election night, I think there's going to be 3 big pieces of news announced by the media. First, I think the Democratic Party is going to retain control of the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi has convinced me of that, and you don't argue with Nancy. Not even Trump argued with Nancy. The second thing, and I'm pretty confident of this, is that we're going to pick up some seats in the U.S. Senate. The most amazing news for a lot of people in this country, people that maybe don't live in Texas, is Beto O'Rourke is going to be the new governor. He can't do it without you. Every one of you needs to make a commitment to make everything you can do to make sure that we get over the top of this election. If you can knock on doors, then sign up to knock on the doors. If you can write letters, sign up to write on the doors. If you can text. If you can do anything else, if you can carry water, it doesn't matter. But we need a maximum effort in this campaign because we know it'll probably be a close election, and close elections are almost always determined by who turns out to vote. And I expect all of you to turn out to vote. And neighbors, don't tell me that you don't know 10 or 12 Democrats that you can influence. I've heard people say, I don't know but 5 Democrats. It's not true. Anybody that's in the state of Texas that's a registered voter can help Beto win. So let's don't leave anything on the table at the end of this election. Let's make our maximum effort to make sure that Beto is the next governor of Texas. Statewide candidates that are very high quality candidates. We have one here for us today, Luke Warford, who's running for the state railroad commission. And there's a good reason for it. The reason is that these are elected officials on the board, and virtually all of their campaign contributions come from the oil and gas industry, which is the industry they're charged with regulating. Now we know that that's like asking the rats to grab the garden cheap. It doesn't work. And so we need someone like Luke to come in and really represent the people of the state of Texas. So please welcome.
Thanks so much, George. Good afternoon, Brenham. That was pretty good, but let's do it one more time. Good afternoon, Brenham. Who's ready to elect Beto O'Rourke as the next president? As George said, my name is Luke Warford. I am your Democratic nominee for the Texas Railroad Commission. The Texas Railroad Commission, as many of y'all know, has nothing to do with railroads anymore. What it actually does is it regulates the Texas oil and gas industry, which makes it one of the most important elected offices that we've got in the state for our economy, for our environment, and for our ability to keep the lights on. Now, I'm 32 years old. I'm the youngest Democrat to run statewide in more than 30 years. And I'm running because the issues at stake in this race are too important to wait. George talked to you a little bit about how bad my opponent is. Literally in the last reporting period, 99% of his campaign contributions came from the industry that he's supposed to be regulating. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm going to do for you when I get elected as your Texas Railroad Commissioner. So the first thing is we're going to lower Texas oil and gas emissions. Texas is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the country because the Texas Railroad Commission does not enforce the existing rules on flaring and venting and capping orphan wells. And we emit literally millions of tons of methane and other greenhouse gas emissions every year just because my opponent doesn't do his job.
We gotta stop it.
Definitely. We gotta stop it. Yes, absolutely. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to lower utility prices. Now, we all know that we're paying bills that are too high right now, more than folks in our neighbors in Louisiana, in Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And so much of that is because of the system that George talked about, where the Texas Railroad Commission is bought and paid for by the oil and gas executives that are supposed to be holding accountable, and that jacks up the prices that we all pay and hits Texans across the state. And so when I'm elected, we're going to stop those that monopolistic behavior and lower utility prices for Texans across the state. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the grid failure that happened last February never happens again. We need a clear weatherization standard. We need clear rules about who needs to prepare for cold weather. The Texas Railroad Commissioner is going to be a key partner to the governor on getting that done. And I'm so excited to work on those things with you. If you want to learn more about our campaign, you can go to lukewarford.com. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce the next governor of the state of Texas.
To make sure that we do everything we can with what we have, where we are right now, at this defining moment of truth for us here in this room, for this state, but especially for our kids and grandkids who are looking at us right now from some distant future, the people of 2022, when they had every challenge in the world facing them. when the odds were as high as they had ever been, when everything we could possibly care about, and they're depending on us for, was at stake. They want to know how we came through. And ladies and gentlemen, they're going to read in those history books that we won this election on the 9th of November. We won this together. We in the state of Texas. We won this election because we are fighting for every woman to make her own decisions about her own body. We won this election because I get the back of every public school educator, every classroom teacher, every counselor, every librarian, every retired educator. We're going to do right by them. We're going to make sure that we pay them enough to have just one, not 2 or 3 jobs. We're going to cancel the STAR test so they can focus on those skills. We're going to ensure that retired teachers get a cost of living adjustment every single year going forward so that they can enjoy their retirement. Working with Luke Warford, we are going to fix the grid, connect ERCOT to the national grid, reduce the utility bills, go get back the $11 billion that was stolen from you and from me by energy traders and pipeline CEOs while you were freezing in your homes in the energy capital of the world. They made more money than had ever been made in a similar 5-day period in the history of the state of Texas. And not only was it immoral, it was illegal. There's a state statute that expressly prohibits the price gouging of our fellow Texans at a moment of a declared emergency or disaster like we had last February. And what our governor did is he ordered those lapdogs on the PUC to peg the price of electricity at its maximum allowable rate, not for minutes, not for hours, but for days. Gas was trading at 200 times the going rate. Some utilities in the state of Texas had to declare bankruptcy. Others took billions of dollars in debt, and all of that was illegal. We're going to, after we win this election, go into those courtrooms, get our $11 billion back, and return it to the people of Texas to bring down the utility bills and make sure there's some justice in the low price that we have today. And I'm telling you, we're going to win because we're going to win back this democracy. No one is the right to vote under greater attack than in this state at this moment. 13% of the mail-in ballots cast just this last March, and this year, 2022, were rejected. Now, if we watch the news tonight, and the anchor says Venezuela had elections today, and 13% of the ballots cast were rejected, we don't say that checks out. That's not a real democracy. That's not like us here in America, 246 years into this experiment. It's not like the great people of Texas who have literally fought and bled and died for the exception to the rule in world history, the thing that sets us apart from everyone else that we can freely and fairly choose, those who will represent us, those who will serve us in these positions of public trust. It is harder to vote in this state, it's harder to register in Texas than it is in any other in the Union right now. When you read 7 million of our fellow Texans who are eligible to did not cast a ballot in 2020, the most consequential presidential election of our lifetimes. 7 million. They're not lazy. They don't lack any love for this great democracy. But when you have closed down more than 700 polling places in the fastest growing state in this country, and the majority of them were closed down in the fastest growing black and brown neighborhoods in our communities, when you have a racial gerrymander of our state districts, so that if you are black or brown, you are very often drawn out to minimize your voting power and elevate that of other Texans. When you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at that polling place, but you dare not use your student ID at any one of our public institutions to do the same, you understand the challenge that we are up against right now and why we must come through. And I tell you, we've got our work cut out for us, because where we are today, some of those things that we just referenced, the grid failing and still not being fixed, the buck being passed to you, literally $45 a month more on average per Texas ratepayer today, a total ban on abortion with no exception for rape, no exception for incest. Our 4th grade classrooms, 7 out of 10 kids in those rooms unable to read at grade level right now. That has everything to do with the failures of those in power right now, and it's in no way a reflection of who we are as Texans, because millions of our friends and our family members and our neighbors literally have yet to be heard from, their votes yet to be cast or counted into the future of this state. We've got to make sure that we come through for them right now. This really is our moment of truth. And if I can, because we have some air conditioning in this room, it is so rare that we get to do this. We were with Steve in Bastrop just a little while ago. We were outdoors, 104 degree heat. My shirt has just dried 3 hours after that. My socks are still soaked. But give me just a few minutes to share with you this history. And I only do this because I'm in Washington County right now. And I've become so fascinated by your contribution to our democracy. And for those who know this story, forgive me, indulge me. For those who do not, it's worth your attention. 1886. Elections are taking place right here in this county. It's at the end of Reconstruction, so African American men still have the ability to participate. Maybe not fully, maybe not equally, but they're holding political office. They're holding positions of public trust. They're able to contend and run, and at a minimum, they're able to vote. Fearing that, there is a white supremacist organization in this very county that organizes the theft of the ballot boxes in that election. In black majority precincts, they literally go in and raid the polling place and steal the votes at gunpoint. You all who've been watching the January 6th hearings, there's nothing new under the sun. We invented this stuff in Texas, actually, right here in Washington County. At the Fluellen precinct, one of these masked gunmen walks in, gun drawn, he's going to steal the ballot boxes. But the poll workers there, all of whom happen to be African American, resist. And there's a struggle. And in the struggle, that gunman is killed. Every one of those poll workers in that precinct is arrested and taken to the county jail. And I think they're transported to Harris County, and I think for some reason they're brought back to Washington County. And then a mob descends on the county jail here in 1886, and they select 3 of those prisoners. They take them out to the outskirts of town, and they hang them. They lynch them. It just so happens that those 3 men who were killed in this way, who were lynched in this way, happen to know the names of all the ringleaders of this plot. So without their testimony, without the evidence they could have provided, it was very hard to get justice. However, there's this enterprising United States attorney by the name of Rudolph Clayburgh, who happens to be a predecessor, an ancestor, a forefather of Jay Clayburgh, who's our nominee for land commissioner in the state of Texas right now. I did nothing new under the sun. He seeks to prosecute the county judge right here in Washington County, the man who led this ballot theft ring that turned so deadly that ended in the deaths of 4 people, including those 3 poll workers. But he is up against the greatest odds you can imagine. I think his attorney for the county judge was the former governor of the state of Texas. Sitting right next to him at the defense table is the current senior United States senator for the state of Texas. An unambiguous signal to the judge right there and to all the people in the jury just who holds the reins of power in this state. Try as he might, Clayburgh is unable to bring justice. So, the story doesn't end here. They are watching around the country. They call this the election outrage. And it makes it all the way to D.C., and you've got United States House of Representatives committeemen and U.S. senators sitting in session, and they hear the testimony. They find out what happened right here in this community in 1886, and they say, you know what? We got to do something. And they write a federal elections bill of 1890 that will protect the right to vote regardless of the color of your skin or any previous service in bondage and slavery that you might have endured. We want to make sure that this democracy, our Constitution, really works for everyone, or really works for men at that time, because women still could not vote, right? Check this out. The bill passes the House of Representatives. There's a pro Democracy Party in power at the time. It happened to be the Republicans, the party of Abraham Lincoln, who believed in the Constitution, who were the backers of Reconstruction, who wanted to make sure that political power was shared equally among all of our fellow Americans. Again, at least if you were a man. It passes the House of Representatives. It's going to pass the United States Senate because we have a Republican majority in 1890 in that institution as well. And the President of the United States, also a Republican, had just won election on a platform of restoring the vote to African Americans in Texas and across the states of the former Confederacy. But there's this thing called the filibuster that is led by the senior Texas senator, the same guy who was sitting next to the county judge from Washington County during his trial. And they're able to stop that last best hope for democracy. The cynicism of those in power, the unwillingness of our fellow Texans back in 1890 to stand up and fight and be counted for the right to vote for everyone, imperiled that bill. And it would not be until 1965, 75 years later, that we got another crack at it. And you know who led the way? Lyndon Baines Johnson, the first president from the state of Texas, was thinking about his childhood, growing up here in this state, who had power, who did not have power, was watching over there in Selma, Alabama, when a 24-year-old John Lewis is crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, marching not just for himself and those who look like him, but all of us, all the way through to 2022 and beyond, to make sure that if you live in this country, if you're an eligible citizen, that your right to vote is not denied. And Johnson convenes a joint session of Congress. Imagine you are them in 1965, a week after Bloody Sunday, and he says, ladies and gentlemen of the United States Congress, as it was in Concord in 1776 and the War for Independence from England, as it was in Appomattox at the end of the Civil War, which defined whether or not we would be a slave-holding country or a true democracy, so it is today in 1965, those men and women willing to lose their lives crossing that bridge in Selma for our very democracy. Who are we who have the power to confer this right, not to give it after so much struggle, so much service, and so much sacrifice? By the summer of that year, he made that speech in March, he's able to sign the Voting Rights Act into law, finally creating the first true multiracial democracy in the history of this country, maybe in the history of planet Earth. And that came from the people of the state of Texas ultimately. That wrong was right ultimately 75 years later, but we got it done. Well, now that our democracy is under attack again, unlike any time that I can think of since the Jim Crow era, maybe you have to go back to 1886 and the election here to find a ballot theft plot so brazen as the one that we saw last year in January. It is now on us to do the right thing. And now some of us can see that and it can be depressing. And it can tempt us to despair, give up hope and say, you know what, we're just going to submit to this. I guess that's just where we are headed as a country. The flip side of this, think about LBJ's speech in 65. How many generations are as lucky as ours? How many people as fortunate as we are to be alive and breathing at this moment, in this state, in this country, at a time that our democracy faces its moments of maximum peril? You get to be the heroes of this story that our kids and grandkids and their kids and grandkids and read about decades down the road. If you are willing, as George just encouraged us to do, if you're willing to sign up and take a shift, knocking on doors and meeting people where they are, will win this election. If you're unwilling to do this, I'll just make this really clear, eyes wide open, we're all on the same page, we won't. It will not be the candidate, it will not be his political party. By the way, if you're a Democrat, I'm glad you're here. Independents, you're welcome. Republicans, I want you to know that you're in the right place as well. This is going to be all of us doing this together, right? We're putting country and state before party or any other difference between us right now. But listen, in a state this voter suppressed, this voter intimidated, this democracy challenged, those 7 million, and there are tens of thousands of them in Washington County, eligible to vote, but didn't cast a ballot. If we don't show up on their doors, they're not coming into this election. When political scientists reach out to those 7 million eligible non-voters, ask them why they didn't vote, number one reason given, no one asked them to. You show up at their door, human to human, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. You make that connection that is profound and defies any other thing that we could do in politics. You know, a TV ad only goes so far. The cute things we post on social media, the letter that you might get in the mail, you know, the spot that you may or may not hear on the radio. A human being showing up at your door and having a conversation about why this is the most important election in our lifetimes, from their own heart, in their own words, and in using their own ears to listen to that person behind the other side of that door about what matters most to them, guarantee it, there's a far greater chance that they will turn out to vote, and when they do, they will vote with us. We did something like this in 2018, right? We had the largest voter turnout in Texas since 1970 in that election. I became the first Democrat since LBJ to win the 4 major metro areas and their surrounding counties. That hadn't happened since 1964. Young voter turnout was up 504% from the previous election. We elected 12 new Democratic state reps, replacing those Republicans who were there. 2 new members of the House of Representatives, flipping control of that chamber. In Harris County, 17 African American women were elected to judicial positions there alone. This stuff works. And that is the base that we're building on right now. Those relationships, those connections, those doors that we knocked on, we're going to build on top of that right now and finish the job. And let me tell you, there's every sign in the world that this is working. 83,000 people so far have signed up to take a shift, to knock on those doors. We're going to be able to reach millions of voters where they are. They don't have to come to us at meetings like these, although I love it when they do. We'll go literally to their door. This is like the Domino's of politics, right? Home delivery. If you're not registered to vote, we'll connect you to a volunteer deputy registrar. We'll get you on the rolls. We're going to make this as easy for you as possible, at the same time that Greg Abbott is trying to make it as hard for you as possible. And when those 83,000 people show up, and we're going to grow those numbers every day, the people who are drawn out of our democracy are brought in. And I guarantee you, they're going to be the margin of victory on election night on November 8th. You're going to make that happen. But if those 83,000 people are not enough to encourage you that we can do this, in the last fundraising reporting period, we outraised Greg Abbott by almost $3 million. $500,000 individual contributions. The largest group of donors were school teachers right here in the state of Texas. This is just a reminder that Greg Abbott has yet to fix the grid, okay? Lots of going on throughout this presentation. And then, I don't know if this stuff matters to you all, but Quinnipiac, which is the gold standard in political polling, took the measure of this race in December. We had just gotten in, and they found us 15 points down. Well, they just looked at it again last month. We are now 5 points down. We made up 10 points in 6 months without spending a dime of money on TV, while Greg Abbott spent millions of dollars on TV. And there's this big liberal state called Kansas. Voted for Donald Trump at a much higher rate than our fellow Texans voted for Donald Trump. I mean, folks have written that state off. There's no way that the folks there see the things the way we do and come to the same conclusion. And yet, those who believe in choice, women's ability to decide their own future, their own fortune, their own fate, won that election on choice 60% to 40%. Be she a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, an unaffiliated, an unregistered right now, and willing to get on the rolls. And she says, man, I wish there was a referendum like that in the state of Texas. Share with her this governor's race is the referendum on that in the state of Texas. And we're going to show up in Kansas, and we're going to show up right here in Texas. So listen, if you care about any of the things that we've talked about so far today, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to you as well so I can hear about the issues that brought you out here right now. But for any of this, if you want to be part of this victory, if you want to make sure that we win, if you don't want to wake up on the morning after this election, November 9th, saying, I wish I had done a little something more, given what was at stake, and the little existential decision that we were making about not just our lives, I mean, they're important, but I'd say the kids and grandkids and the generations that follow us, they're going to have to endure whatever we do or fail to do more than any of us here will. If you don't want to grow, if you don't want to wake up with that kind of regret, and instead you want to wake up with the most glorious hangover you have ever had, make sure that you come all in with us on this election. Again, the folks in the yellow vests, they'll sign you up for a block walking ship. So many things that I could talk about and I want to talk about, but I went on in my history lesson on 1886 to bring us up to today. So I want to make sure that I leave the floor to you. There are a couple of things that I haven't mentioned. If you don't bring them up, I will by the end of the meeting. So don't think if I haven't raised it, it's not important to me. I just want to make sure that I'm respectful to you, defer to you, get a chance to listen to you. You drive the agenda. Cynthia Cano, who is to your right, has a microphone in her hand. She will bring that to you. Raise your hand. You can ask anything, really. You can offer any suggestion or idea. My best hope of serving Washington County and Brenham is to listen to and learn from the people who live here. That's why we came out, and it looks like we've got our first question right here. Ms. Cano.
I just would love it if you could share with the general population who might not have students in college out of state what it takes for them to absentee ballot vote and how difficult that has become. I'm asking because I have out-of-state college kids and it's extremely difficult.
Yeah. In the middle of this pandemic, that in our state alone has claimed nearly 100,000 lives. You might think that our government, our governor would make it easier, not harder, to vote. But instead, they decided there'd be one ballot drop-off location per county, whether you live in Washington County or Harris County, which has more people than the entire state of Nevada. You think you'd have no fault absentee or mail-in voting. Instead, you had 13% of the mail-in ballots rejected in March. And instead, you have a World War II vet, 95 years old. This guy put his life on the line, literally, to defend this democracy, fighting fascism half the world away. And his request to vote by mail, absentee, just as your kids want to do in college, rejected not once, but 3 times. If anyone has earned the right to vote, it's that guy. And you can't vote in this democracy in this state. So, you asked a great question. If you are over the age of 65, if you have a disability, and I would encourage you just to read the state code because they changed our election laws last year to make it a lot harder on people. I want to make sure that you are applying for that ballot by mail, that absentee ballot, as soon as you possibly can. That you remember that you need to use the same form of ID on that mail-in ballot that you originally used to register with. In your kid's case, that may have been 2 years ago. In that World War II veterans case, that was 70 years ago. We can forgive the guy for not remembering how he registered to vote 70 years ago and being unable to match it with his current ID today. So we want to make sure that through our campaign, and we have a voter protection team that will work on this. You can go to bentoprotexit.com to sign up, or the Texas Democratic Party, or the Texas Civil Rights Project, and there's so many great groups out there where you or your kids can make sure they know the deadlines, the dates, the rules, and the way to make sure they get that ballot in and they get it in on time. Thanks for asking. Super important. Yes, Ms. Conley.
Hi, my name is Emma. I am a college student from right down the road in Austin County. Don't get me wrong, I'm 100% a Democrat, 100% voting for you. But I've been kind of frustrated with Democrats campaigning on promising to make college cheaper. So what are you going to do to help Texans pay for college?
Thanks for asking this question. And listen, I like that you said it shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, we should get this done. But just so everyone's on the same page, there has not been a Democratic governor in this state for 32 years, right? Or the last one 32 years ago. Republican majority vote changers for the last 2 decades. We haven't really had a chance to take a shot at this one. Here's a proposal for me. We are losing educators by the thousands in this state. We also have a shortage of nurses of 20,000 in the state. So we're 20,000 down. So the nurse to patient ratio, which should be 1 to 4 in some clinical settings, or 1 to 6, it's like 1 to 8, it's 1 to 10, it's 1 to 12. They're leaving the profession to become travel nurses, to earn more money, to be treated with a little bit more respect. These heroes who literally saved our lives during the pandemic are now bearing the brunt of the frustration from the public. We're having these longer wait times because we don't have enough nurses. Not enough medical providers. Some counties I've been to, not a single psychiatrist or psychologist or social worker or clinician in the entire county. So, to your question, if you're willing to work in one of these in-demand professions that we are struggling to fill right now, and cost is an object. In other words, you don't want to or cannot shoulder the debt that you'll have to take on in order to get that education, enter the classroom, to become a nurse, to become a physician, to become a mental health care provider. I propose that the state of Texas pay your way on condition that you come back to the community that nurtured you in the first place, be it Washington County or Memphis County, any other part of the state. And you practice it, you teach it, you serve here for a minimum of 6 years. We grow our own, in other words. If you go to these medical school classrooms across the state, we love every young person who's in them, but they are overwhelmingly reflective of the big cities and the suburbs. It is so rare to see a young person from a rural community in a medical school class. It's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that it's all too rare. And for the bargain price of that medical school or 4-year education for a teacher or nursing degree, for that bargain price, we get someone who can come in and serve this community. So I'm well aware of how expensive it is to go to college, to go to medical school in the state of Texas. I want to bring those costs down for everyone, especially at our public institutions. But if you're willing to work in one of these in-demand professions and come back to your hometown, I want to clear the way for you completely so you can get it done. Thanks for asking the question. I appreciate it.
I know you talked on this a little bit, but you had mentioned that you wanted to protect the right for abortions as well as contraceptives. I wanted to hear a little more detail on that because it's not just about getting that for us, but it's also about keeping us healthy too. So yeah.
Thanks for asking this question. I think many of us, maybe all of us in this room, are horrified both by the Dobbs decision that overturns Roe versus Wade, as well as the fact that Texas has on the books a law that goes into effect on the 25th of this month. So it's 20 days from today. Abortion will be totally illegal beginning at conception, with no exception for rape or incest. But I can tell from your question that you've been paying attention, because this attack on women's rights is not brand new. It didn't happen this year or the last. It's been going on for more than a decade. And as our state government, led by Greg Abbott, has successfully closed down one reproductive health care clinic after another, not only has it become harder, in some counties impossible, to get an abortion, which has been protected by the Constitution until last month, for half a century, but almost impossible to get a cervical cancer screening, or to see a family planning provider, or to see a doctor of any kind in our most underserved communities in the least insured state in America. This goes beyond abortion, and it leads us to where we are, the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis that is one of the worst in the developed world, and is 3 times as bad for black women in the state of Texas as it is for white women in the state of Texas. We're losing them faster than we are almost anywhere else in this country today. It's important that we say that because we're going to invoke our fellow Texans' power of empathy and see this not just as an ideological or religious or faith-based issue, but really one that is life and death for the women in our lives right now. If it is any comfort to us, I think 89% of our fellow Texans, that's a whole hell of a lot of Republicans, independents, and Democrats, 89% disagree with Greg Abbott on this total abortion ban. Even folks who consider themselves pro-life say, this is too far, it is too cruel, it's going to force too many women into difficult situations. Everyone here knows that outlawing abortion will not stop abortion in the state of Texas. It will make it far more dangerous than it was before in the state of Texas. For the epicenter today, it will become much worse when it comes to maternal mortality going forward. But I want you to have hope. Not only can we and will we win this election, that will send a shockwave through this state and frankly through this country. One of the last places anybody expects it to come after Kansas, perhaps. Not only that, but if you think back to 1972, 50 years ago, abortion was also at that time illegal in the state of Texas. And no one came in to rescue us or save the day. Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade was our fellow Texan. Linda Coffey, her attorney, who still lives in Dallas, Texas, and her other attorney, Sarah Weddington from Abilene, successfully pled that case before an all-male United States Supreme Court and won the right to privacy to make these very personal, very often painful decisions that had stood the test of time for nearly half a century. So I just tell you, in case anyone thinks we don't have it in us, we've done this before against much, much greater odds. And it was Texas women who did it in 1973. And I believe it's going to be Texas women who do it
I'm so happy to talk to you. I have a question about our corruption that we have in our justice system. I want to know, what are you going to do about the people that are trying to take my family's land that we've been having since the 1800s? Because they have more money than me to fight. You know, our justice system is so messed up right now. That's the reason why we can't walk the streets and be proud of who we are without somebody right here in Washington County, Burleson County, and a few other ones around here. We have to feel like we are less than just because our skin is a different color. That's not right. And it shouldn't be in the 2022 era, you know.
Thank you for being here. Absolutely. One of the things that makes me so proud to be an American is that we were founded on this idea that not only were we all created equal, but that we would all be treated equally under the law. Now that's the idea. That's the ideal. We never reached it in these 246 years, but I'd like to think we never stopped trying to get there. I mentioned one way we did it, the Voting Rights Act of '65. The year before that, the Civil Rights Act of '64. Those were landmark victories. But one of the things that I've come to understand late in life, I'll be 50 years old in September, is that none of these victories are final. We like to think, especially I'll just say myself as a white man, I like to think, hey, we're past that. We won this. 64, 65, we got that thing done. I like to think as a man when I'm thinking about women in the state. 1973, Roe versus Wade, we got that thing done. Let's move on to the next thing. Progress is inevitable. It moves in one direction. Every victory won is final, but not so fast. That Voting Rights Act of '65 was stripped of almost all of its protections 10 years ago in the Supreme Court Shelby decision. You mentioned Dobbs versus Roe versus Wade just last month. And the full civil rights of our fellow Texans, our fellow Americans, are under attack at a time that's hard for us to think of any precedent unless you go back to the Jim Crow era. I'll give you an example. You mentioned the justice system, and I want to follow up with you afterwards to find out what is happening with your family's property. But if we just look at those who are incarcerated today, this country puts more people behind bars than any other country on the planet today. Whatever you think of China, or Russia, or North Korea, or Iran, we put more of our own behind bars than any of those countries do. And in this country that is so overly incarcerated, this state puts more people behind bars than any other state, including a state that has more than 10 million more people than we do, right? California. And you know who's behind bars? It does not accurately reflect the proportion of the population that we have in Texas. It is overly represented by black and brown Texans. A large number of them there for non-violent drug crimes. One of the things that I want to do, this is just a small step in the right direction, is not only legalize cannabis in the state of Texas. But ensure that everyone who served time for possession of a substance that's legal in almost every other state in the union has their record expunged. And then we take a hard look at our entire criminal justice system. The laws that are on the books and who they are intended to protect, and who they are intended to target, the judges on those benches, members of law enforcement who we respect and are grateful for, given the incredibly important job they have, literally keeping us safe, and they too putting their lives on the line. We want to make sure their departments are fully funded, that they get their full training, but that they are also held accountable to the very highest standards, because they have the power of life and death, imprisonment and freedom over their fellow Americans, their fellow Texans. I don't think that's asking too much, and I have yet to meet a member of law enforcement who does not want to be able to pass that bar of accountability. What they will tell me is that those who abuse the public trust and abuse that power they have over us, not only do they represent a fraction, a small minority of those who wear the badge, but their actions left unchecked tarnish the reputation and break the trust that they have with members of the public. So there is a lot of work for us to do. I just want you to know that I now better than ever understand the task before us, and the fact that even when we win, whether that's the election on the 8th of November or passing some of this legislation that we've talked about, the fight is never over, because none of these victories will ever be final. I think the other side understands that all too well. We're going to have to fight every day of our lives till our last breath to secure this democracy. That's what it takes if you want to live in the greatest country in the world. Thank you very much.
In the middle, right here.
Ah, there you go.
Since 1994, we Democrats and independents have failed to win a single election in the entire state, well, the entire state of Texas. I think that's true. I have looked high and low because I feel that if Democrats realize that we actually have enough Democrats and independents to win an election, they'll vote. But I cannot find how many Democrats or how many Republicans there are in the state of Texas. Can you tell us if that's true and why?
Yeah, great question. Let me read you a number right here that is as local as it gets. I keep mentioning the 7 million who are out there, who are eligible to vote in 2020 but didn't cast a ballot. And remember, for context, when we ran in 2018 for the United States Senate, we only lost to Ted Cruz by 216,000 votes. So 7 million who didn't vote in 2020, 216,000 votes was the margin. Here in Washington County, 2020, there were 5,536 people eligible to vote who didn't cast a ballot. Since 2020, nearly 1,500 new voters have entered the rolls. These are very often young people who've just aged into eligibility. There are folks who've naturalized, immigrants from other countries. Those folks, nearly 7,000, we have yet to hear from. Their votes have yet to be counted. That's just in one of the 254 counties in the state of Texas. When I make this appeal to you to volunteer to knock on doors, I'm asking you to go knock on the doors of those 7,000 people and give them a reason to get in. Are they a school teacher who's thinking about leaving the profession because they're treated with such disrespect? They're working too many jobs to get by. They don't want to teach this high stakes, high pressure test. Say, you know what? There's a candidate running who's going to have your back. He's going to fight for you. Is it someone who's concerned about reproductive health care and their freedom and their constitutionally protected rights? They need to know that someone's going to have their back. You know, your own words from your own heart, talking to those voters who can decide the outcome of this election. It is totally, to your point, within our grasp to be able to do it. And there's also this. You know the Democrats here in this community. Some of them are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to vote. O'Rourke, Warford, they're never going to win in Washington County. It's not unlike the Democrat in Travis, where Austin is, right, who says, I'm not going to vote. Warford or O'Rourke, they're going to just kill it here in Travis County. They don't need my vote. What we all got to remember is wherever we are in the state of Texas, however red, however rural, however blue, however big city, our votes all count for the same as they make their way up to the top of the ticket. We got to make sure that we remind one another about this. This attack on our democracy, so far, it has been working. The only antidote or answer to that is you showing up at that door. And I'm just going to warn you, you're going to sweat through everything you are wearing when you're out there. I'm going to warn you, there are going to be some awkward conversations, some folks who don't want to hear from you. But I'll tell you what, there are others who've been waiting for you their entire lifetime. So it's like, you know what? No one's ever knocked on my door. No one's ever heard my story about being a foster parent and how difficult it is to raise this child in a CPS system that is the worst one in the United States of America. I was waiting to tell somebody about this. You showed up to my door. Wait, what's that mean? Beto wants to reform CPS, fully fund those CPS caseworkers, support those foster parents. You want that? What's going to help this person? It's those conversations that it's going to take. And for anyone who doubts the efficacy, I ran against an 8-term incumbent for Congress in 2012. He outspent me 5-1. I made it my full-time job to knock on doors every day. I do, 90 to 120 doors a day. So many amazing conversations. I learned so much from the people that I wanted to represent in the House of Representatives. And I knew it was working towards the end of that election. I was walking into a diner one Monday morning. This guy stops me and says, "Hey, are you Beto?" I said, "I am." It's Thursday of last week. You knocked on my grandmother's door. And she invited you in. And she told you about her daughter who's a school teacher. She's so proud of her. And she really struggles to make ends meet. Just listen to her. She told you about my cousin who's a Marine and how proud she is of him, his service to our country. This guy said, "I don't think you talked about a single policy proposal or, a partisan issue. I mean, I didn't even know if she knew you were a Democrat or Republican. You never asked her what party she belonged to. You guys just made a connection." Well, he said, "Listen, it must have worked because this past Sunday, yesterday, I and my 32 cousins came to her house for menudo. And as we were eating menudo on Sunday morning, as we do every Sunday morning at her house, she made every single one of us promise to vote for you in this election." Because I said, "The work of the witness is take care and do it good."
I have time for 3 more questions.
Okay, so I appreciate as a case manager that you saying that you're going to change the reform in the case in the CPS. I guess it's really you need to start even with the people that are running the facilities, because these people just get these certifications, which is so easy to do, but they're not making the right decisions. It's really about money. It isn't really about the care of the kids. And so for us that have been in this, working with these kids to make a difference in their lives, it's really hard for us because we feel like we're going uphill, with a couple thousand bags on our back. But also, my question was, my husband is a veteran, and when we got back in 2004, because the economy was bad, he lost his job multiple times, and we have been paying what normal people would pay for a house, and we probably could have bought 2 houses in the rent that we paid as renters. And I think they feel they take advantage of renters. And I would just like to know, would there be any reform for people like us that see when you pay your rent every day, they don't report that. They don't say, oh yes, the Waterloops have been faithful for 20 years in paying their rent on time. They just look at your score and they go, you're not a candidate. They don't look at the fact that we can make that mortgage.
Great question. Yes, let me answer that. On the first point, just briefly, because we lost the lives of 100 kids in the foster care system just since 2020. So that's the last year and a half. 100 kids here in the 9th largest economy on the planet, $2 trillion GDP, not for lack of wealth or resources. We have them coming out of our ears. It's for lack of political leadership, for will, for lifting up the most vulnerable among us. That's the cost and the consequence. We're just in Bastrop, and you mentioned these privatized facilities. These girls, 11, 12, 13 years old, who were rescued from sex trafficking, were sent to this private facility, privatized care for foster kids, where they were abused, where images of them, nude pictures of them, child pornography of them was trafficked. There are some things that you just don't privatize. I mean, sometimes you want to do it. It just makes sense. The government should be getting involved. But the foster care system, these 32,000 kids, I don't trust them to anybody. I want to make sure that we, the people of Texas, are ultimately accountable for relying on profit motives. The prison system, we don't need private prisons because the profit motive puts more people behind bars. And the last thing we ever do is allow the state of Texas to take their public tax dollars out of your public school classrooms and send them for you and your husband, for every family who has served this country, been willing to lose your life in service not to a president or a political party, but that sworn oath to this Constitution and our democracy that I've been talking so much about. Got to make sure that we fulfill our end of the bargain. We, as a country, spare no expense to send you off to war, to recruit you and enlist you and advertise to you and compel you to join. And we're grateful that you did. But when it's time to separate and become a retiree or a veteran, it's like we no longer know your name or how to find you or where to send the check. The wait times at some VAs for a Vietnam-era veteran to get in to see somebody for his post-traumatic stress disorder, measured not in days or weeks, sometimes not even months, but in years. Tonight, in this wealthy state, there will be hundreds of veterans sleeping on the side of roads, underneath bridges, in our parks, sleeping on benches right now. Again, not for lack of resources, but political will. There are programs, as you all know, that you have earned as a family through your service that subsidize loans for home ownership so that you're able to build equity. And I think one of the things I heard you say is, right, I was going to say, one of the things you shared is that you paid your rent, right? Every month, on time. You're proving yourself trustworthy for that note on the mortgage payment going forward. I want to make sure that the state of Texas has your back. Now listen, the VA and our federal government have the ultimate responsibility, but we cannot always count on them to come through. And this state, which I think boasts more military retirees and veterans than any other, if not than nearly any other, has the most to gain or to lose. So I want to make sure that we use innovative funding instruments like tax credit housing at the state level to build where we do not have it, or to make more affordable where it's already built but where you cannot get in. And if we trusted you to go over there, to take someone else's life, to maybe have your life taken in service to this country, then we should be able to trust you right now as you come back to meet the payments on that note so you have a roof over your head and never have to worry about making the rents again. I'm going to make sure that we get this done in the state of Texas because Republicans, Democrats, independents alike want to make sure that we're there for our hands back to this question.
Two questions.
Hello, Mr. O'Rourke. My name is Lennon, and I'm 15 years old. So I just wanted to ask, what can we, the younger generations, do to help fight for you? Just this last January, a 10-year-old was denied an abortion in the state of Ohio because she wasn't old enough to fight for herself. we in the younger generations and in Gen Z, we may not look like it, but we are willing and ready to fight for you. How can we fight for you?
Lennon, if you showed up at my door, block walking for your work campaign, I'd vote for that guy. You make such a good case. You speak with the courage of your conviction. You're just so thoughtful, and you're doing this for the right reasons. I can just tell. I get that sense from you right away. This is one of those things you can't convey in a TV ad, right? You may not be able to get across in a telephone call or a slick mailer that shows up in your mailbox. But Lennon, you show up at someone's door, you're going to break through, and they're going to want to come in and vote with us in this election. So even though you cannot vote, you can still canvass, and you can still talk to voters, and you can still be one of our lead volunteers. I'm going to make sure that Cynthia and our team, Christy, who's here as well, that we get your contact information, we follow up with you, and then you introduce us to other folks that you know. Are you a sophomore in high school? Rising sophomore?
Yes.
Rising sophomore. So my son is 15 years old as well. I'm going to call Ulysses after this meeting. I'm going to say, Lennon came out to one of my times. Lennon's knocking on doors. I'm just so impressed that you're here. And obviously, something I hear in your voice is the urgency that I'm 50 years old. I'll be long gone while you are still living with whatever we do or fail to do at this moment. So you know we got to get this done. We're counting on us. We're also counting on you. Thank you guys.
So as a lot of people know, recently the Republican Party of Texas has come out with a proposal of what they want to do for the next few years. And on that proposal, they have said they want to overturn or limit voting rights for women and people of color. So how do you plan on preventing that in the future?
You know, you hear something like this. Thank you for being here. And I can hear some people kind of chuckling and saying like, that's crazy. And that's my initial reaction, right? And when the Republican Party in years past adopted platforms that said they want to outlaw abortion completely, with no exception for rape or incest, I think probably too many of us were kind of laughing like, well, that'll happen when pigs fly, right? We won Roe versus Wade in 1973. I don't care how conservative Texas gets. They'll never go that far. And yet here we are right now. And not only have you had Justice Clarence Thomas, who sits on the highest court of the land, vote for Dobbs that overturns Roe versus Wade, but in his consenting opinion, he said next on the chopping block is the right to contraception. Next after that is the ability to have intimate relationships with the same-sex partner. What that means is that they would revive the sodomy laws in the state of Texas. And next after that is marriage equality, the ability to marry the person that you love. Again, one of those victories that too many of us, myself included, thought that we had won and was final. Now we move on to the next. He's been pretty prescient on the things that he said that he's coming after, the rights that he wants to repeal. And there are willing partners here in the state of Texas. And it's not the outliers. Literally, to the young woman's question, the official platform adopted by the Texas Republican Party a month ago called for, among other things, secession from the Union. We thought we figured that out in 1865 at mathematics, but they want to give it another go. They refuse to recognize the legitimate, lawful, elected president of the United States.
Answer questions.
Haven't learned our lesson both from the election and from January 6th and from these hearings. They call, this is a quote, homosexuality an abnormal behavior and promise to go after marriage equality. They're proposing to introduce a Don't Say Gay bill in the next legislative session. Beyond being insulting and forcing Texans to endure this indignity, can I just say for a second, how many young kids in this state who are gay, who are lesbian, who are transgender, who already are going through a tough time, maybe getting picked on and bullied at school, and they see the most powerful people in this state tell them that they don't belong, that they are abnormal. Think how weird you already felt when you were 12 or 13 or 14 years old. Now you have the governor telling you you are weird. The rate of suicidal ideation, unfortunately, the rate of suicide attempts among LGBTQ community, the young community in this state, is so many times higher than the general population. I just say that because however you feel on these issues, think about these kids who I think are absolutely innocent to any of our politics, and certainly the hate-fueled rhetoric of today's Republican Party. So, I argue that we got to where we are today for a failure of imagination on the part of those who believe in these rights. We just cannot imagine that we land in the place that we find ourselves today. Let us learn from that mistake and never again make it. They are coming for us, for every single one of us, based on our differences. They want to divide us, they want to separate us, they want to come after us. They want to distract us from the big things that can actually bring us together. Who's going to argue against greater public schools, or better paying jobs, or expanding Medicaid so you don't die of diabetes in the year 2022 in the state of Texas? That's the stuff we should be able to do. Fixing the grid. Is it too much to ask that when you flip the switch, the lights come on? Especially if you live in Texas, in the United States of America. But ask the governor that, and he's going to try to scare you about transgender kids, or Mexicans at the border, or CRT in your schools. I don't think he cares about any of those things at all. I don't think he wants to harm these people either, to be honest with you. But I think he's willing to do that in order to score political points, to retain his political power, and amass even more of it. We deserve a governor who cares nothing more than making sure he delivers for you and your family, no matter what your differences are.